Good morning, everyone. It's very good to see you and certainly to be in the company of such distinguished guests, General Powell and certainly President Knapp. Now is where we take the conversation in a very interesting direction because we're going to look at how the media interacts with the White House in Washington and also with the Blue House here in South Korea. Many of you know that the South Korean press is very vibrant. If you turn on your televisions here, you'll see probably more television networks than you could imagine. And if you go out to a newsstand, there are far more newspapers than perhaps you could imagine as well. Of course, we know the impact of social media and how that is impacting the primary campaign in the United States. We'll talk about all of that with our next panelists, and I would like to introduce them now because they certainly bring great perspective to this panel. Our first panelist spent 25 years as a journalist, and at CNN, she spent 15 years as the bureau chief in Seoul, covering major international news stories. In 2010, she assumed the role as spokesperson of the G20 summit in Seoul. And now she is president and CEO of Arirang Television here, where she's introducing the world to a new global picture of the South Korean economy, society, and culture through broadcast and digital media. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jie-ae Sohn. And our second panelist today is someone you've already seen this morning. He's a former anchor, White House correspondent, and interview host with CNN. He's also a former senior vice president at CNN and the Washington bureau chief. And today, he's director of the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University. Please welcome Frank Sesno. As the Bloomberg person on the panel today, I'm in the presence of two ex-CNN people, so we have a very interesting perspective on the news. I want to start off by asking our panelists to give us a sense of how the media interacts with the White House and the Blue House, in its case here in South Korea. The interaction that we see between the two, especially in the face of this rise of social media. And I'll start off with you, Jie-ae, to give us some perspective on the very vibrant media scene in South Korea.
Thank you. Just to start off, giving you a really sort of a numbers perspective of that vibrant media scene. I just got some numbers off, of course, the internet, as we all do. About how many, this is the end of 2011, so it actually may be outdated by now. But in Korea, there are about 1,200 paper newspapers. There are about 45 broadcast stations. And then there are about more than 1,000 internet newspapers. So we're looking at almost 1,000 to 1,000 traditional to non-traditional media, as if you can call it that. In terms of advertising that is spent around Korea, the traditional media just garners about 50%, and the non-traditional media already garners about 50% as well. So you can see that the traditional and the non-traditional media in Korea is really going shoulder to shoulder in terms of their influence. And some numbers show that around the world, the subscription rate of newspapers will probably go down to 0 by 2040. But they think in Korea, it will go down to 0 in the next 5 to 10 years. So in the face of this kind of environment, the government really has to have a policy towards not just the traditional media, but towards the non-traditional media as well. In my past couple of years, I've also served not only as spokesperson for the G20, but I was in the current Blue House as the president's foreign press secretary, and within in the Blue House at the present time, there is actually a separate press room that deals just with the new media. There is a new media spokesperson. There is a new media team that monitors and also deals with and feeds information just for the new media. And that's not just at the Blue House. In all Korean ministries, there is now a system of having not just the offline spokesperson, but the online spokesperson as well. And of course, not just the president, but all the ministers and all the top government officials are greatly encouraged to participate themselves in communicating with the online media. So it is a very vibrant part of how government deals and communicates with the media in Korea.
Frank Sesno, let's talk about the United States right now, because who would have thought 10 years ago that the President of the United States would use Twitter to convey official messages from the White House? It shows how far we've come. Talk a little bit about how the press and politics intersect.
After 9/11, there was a call to the bureau chiefs of all the major networks. I was one of the bureau chiefs on that call, and we were asked by the White House to be mindful that anything we reported was going globally in real time and could jeopardize security. So we were careful about certain things. But what we found was that, a real live example, a Pakistani news organization online posted information that we had actually not reported. And so the control of that information was almost irrelevant. There was none. Each news organization did its own thing. So I think that's the big change. The big change is a much more complicated, rapid, accelerated process of both the information flow and the decision making and the response by officials in government that go with it.
Let's dig into some of these issues. You talked about the loss of control, which Alec Ross earlier in the program mentioned. Do you feel that the Blue House and perhaps the White House sense this loss of control, and how are they responding to it? Jie-ae, why don't you start off with the South Korean perspective?
Well, right now, there is, I think we're in the process where we're not quite, they don't think they've lost it. And I don't think anyone would at this point think they've lost it, but there's that new relationship going on in terms of how it will change from the traditional relationship, as just Frank talked about, in terms of, Korea, we have the system of the press corps, where the Blue House, as with other ministries like the Foreign Ministry, will have their press corps. And this press corps lives in the Blue House. I mean, they will report for work in the Blue House, they will leave for work at the Blue House, and they become part of the government perspective. Now, with the new media, I'm talking about 1,000 organizations. You're not going to have 1,000 people coming in and living at the Blue House, in addition to the hundreds of people that the president already has. So it's taking the relationship to another level. It's taking that relationship also to a level where you have to figure out how to elevate your offline relationship that you used to have with the traditional media, which involved going out to dinners, going out to lunches, and having these conversations, long conversations, which are considered off the record, so that you gained more knowledge about each other. So do you take that on record? Do you just invite them out to lunch or dinner? There are a lot of decisions that are being made that didn't have to be made before. And I think we're still at that stage where we don't know yet what works. So no one's giving up yet, but it's a whole new world out there.
Frank Sesno, it seems like the rules of journalism are being rewritten.
Largely. There are certainly still traditional news organizations, but what this explosion of change has done has been to alter the equation fundamentally. There's a term we use now. There's a book called Journalism Next, which we have our students read, by an author by the name of Mark Briggs, and he contends that the fundamental difference is that now this must be a conversation, that the public expects to be engaged and involved and sound off, and that those who are in journalism need to involve the public in the work that they do. You can't stand in front of your camera and just speak anymore. You now have to, whether you're tweeting or whether you're Facebooking or whatever else, and you need to listen and use the crowdsourced information, if you can, to your advantage. The question is, how can public officials and journalists and others harness these tools to actually add value to the conversation, or is it just noise? Is it just going to complicate your life, or can you actually govern better or more clearly?
Well, let's get into that point, because there's a lot of criticism of social media that it's diluting the debate, that no one can engage in thoughtful conversation. That, for example, in the primary debate,
140 characters in a Twitter stream. Right?
140 characters.
In Korean language, it's a lot more.
But are are we losing that sense of thoughtful discussion? I mean, look at the Republican primary in the United States. Of course, it's all about the issue of the day, for example, Rush Limbaugh criticizing the Georgetown student, how that developed into a huge story overnight and dictated the news cycle for a day, and then it was on to the next issue. I mean, are we losing sight of the ability of politicians to communicate strategies, policies, in the midst of this 24-hour news cycle and this social media revolution?
I think it's more about, you know, not just about the ability, but it's not a choice anymore. I mean, in the upcoming elections in Korea, they're talking about the influence of the 2040 generation. That's people from the 20s to their 40s. You know, in the past, the peoples in their 20s and 40s didn't vote. And it used to be the more established generation, their 50s and 60s, who were the, you know, the voting generation. But they've noticed recently that the number of voters from the 20s and 40s have jumped, whereas, you know, the 50s and 60s have pretty much kept their pace. So what do you attribute that to? Of course, there are a lot of problems that affect the 20s and the 30s and 40s more. But one of the main reasons is that they found this dialogue channel called the internet or social media or whatever channel you use. And they found that their voice actually makes a difference, and they can really influence the way that politicians work or who gets elected. And so they're looking at this 2040 generation, and you know, each candidate, although if they can do it, they'll do it themselves, and the candidates' ages are getting lower. The people that are doing their campaigns are now in their 20s and 30s, where they used to be in their 50s and 60s. So you have to adapt. It's not a you know, how can you or do I have to anymore. It's how well you do it that gets you elected or not.
The good news is there has never been more information available to more people more rapidly, ever. The bad news is we're not sure yet how they're using all that information. We're pretty sure they're overwhelmed by it. And in terms of the information that people need to know to have a civil society function, to be a free and self-governing republic, as we like to say in the United States, through a free press, it's a very perilous time. Newspapers have destroyed their staffs. They've cut deeply, and there are fewer stories. What's online is shorter. We know people read faster and less online when they're consuming in that way. The White House, since you talked about the Blue House and the White House, just today has released a documentary on President Obama's presidency, which they produced, voiced by Tom Hanks. I wouldn't say that's, you know, cutting-edge journalism, right? That's propaganda. How widely will that be seen? What is the objective equivalent of that? I'm concerned that our alma mater, CNN, like all the other news organizations I know, are diving for ratings and circulation because they're desperate. And desperation, except when it comes to Bloomberg, does not generate fabulous journalism.
He is extremely kind. Well, I don't think we're at the point of desperation yet, but this concern among television journalists is very real, whether you're a journalist at Bloomberg or at CNN. I would give you one personal perspective. Last week I was in Japan to cover the one-year anniversary of the earthquake and tsunami, on Sunday, in fact. And in addition to doing live shots from Kesanuma, which was flattened by the tsunami, I was asked to tweet as often as possible, to Facebook as often as possible, and to record with my iPhone a behind-the-scenes look at what it's like to be out there covering the story. And this is a sea change from, you know, even a year and a half ago when I was here covering the G20 Presidential Summit. No one asked me to do that, but it seems now they care more about what you put on Twitter and Facebook than what goes on the television.
And what's really remarkable now is you're being joined in that endeavor by, for example, the President of the United States. Mm-hmm. So his last town hall was a Google town hall. It was conducted entirely online. The moderator was a Google employee. They solicited questions beforehand and got almost 150,000 questions from the public, some of which they took. He did some video exchange with some questioners. Some of it actually made some news. But the proposition has altered in these interchanges. The president goes on comedy shows now to try to catch the different niche markets. It's much, much, much more difficult.
Let me ask how you would rate your president's handling of interaction with the media. Obviously, you were a spokesman for the Blue House, but how do you think this presidency has treated the media? How would you characterize the interaction here?
Well, we're at a very new stage of that, and I think well, just to give one example, every year the president gives a traditional press conference with everybody, and then in addition to that, he's actually done an online press conference where you will go on, I think he went on 3 different social media sites, Twitter, something called a Korean version of Twitter, and he's not a very good typist. He will do what we call an eagle typing. He'll just go down, swoop down with it, and so he had worked with his 2 fingers and try to answer all these questions that were coming through on the Twitter, and they kept saying, "Are you really the president? Is there someone sitting next to you doing all this?" And he said, if it was, and very slowly, if there was someone else, then I would be talking a lot faster than this. But it's a new attempt. He's from a generation that has never had to do this. They never imagined that, after being president, they would have to sit in front of a computer and start typing with who knows who. I mean, it's not. And usually, you go through a channel verifying who you're talking to. But of course, that's not possible either. So he's adapting to a different from a different age. But I'm sure that the next president will come on the wave of this new generation. And so it will no longer be new for him or her.
Frank, how would you rate this White House's handling of the media?
Poorly.
Explain.
To be blunt about it, I think that they have been overly controlling. They have perceived Barack Obama to be this kind of superstar and that creates a bubble around them. They're very aggressive in new media, but in terms of actually putting the president out there in the kinds of ways that will serve, he's done fewer news conferences than he should have, for example. I think that there's a lot of criticism about how information is managed internally at the White House and how accountable they actually are to the real questions. So it's easy to criticize from the outside because we all want more access. The public all wants more access. But when you look at how the messaging is done, that's really where the proof is. I think this is going to change very dramatically now because actually as of today, the White House has moved very aggressively into overt, political season mode. So they're now starting to attack their Republican competitors and that kind of thing. That'll just make it harder to tell what's actually going on. But it's very interesting. So for example, now you were mentioning Twitter. At a White House briefing now, I don't know if you know this, but at a White House briefing now, they actually have somebody from the president's press office sitting tweeting during the daily briefing. And they're reading the Twitter streams of the reporters in the room. So if they see a tweet from a reporter two aisles away, there's somebody from the president's staff to instantly respond to the tweet from the journalist who's listening to the briefing. It's really conducive to thoughtful deliberation.
That's right. Yes, very conducive. You wonder if anyone is paying attention. Are we to blame for this, though?
Yes.
We've criticized the White House, we've criticized the Blue House. Well, perhaps you didn't criticize the Blue House, but what can we do better as journalists? Certainly we're not perfect.
Frank, I'll let you take it.
No, go ahead, I insist.
We're not perfect. I think I'm just trying to figure all this out. I mean, it's such a changing environment. I mean, I don't know how you do it, Frank. I mean, I talk to young people in Korea who want to become journalists, and I ask them, do you know what journalism means anymore? It's just as journalists, we used to consider ourselves the gatekeepers. We used to think that they would turn to journalists for. At the end of the day, they would turn to journalists for what is really going on. But even that supposition has sort of pretty much gone away. In Korea recently, I mean, the media, we talked about how it influences the way it goes on. The difference between the traditional media and the online media in terms of your reliance or reliability has really gone away. You know, recently there was a podcast in Korea where people came and, you know, these commentators, in Korea, liberal commentators are the ones that really utilize the internet to their fullest advantage versus the United States. But they came up and spread what is still now considered sort of rumors about a very front-running candidate for the Seoul mayor. And that rumor and that podcast was instrumental in pulling her down, and it was her downfall. And to this day, nothing has been proven. But, you know, who cares? Because it's already, the damage has already been done.
Some of this, though, it's sort of ever been thus, right? You know, Thomas Jefferson had a really lousy time with the press that he extolled. I mean, they revealed some of his alleged affairs. You know, he had his own Clinton issue. And Abraham Lincoln was hounded by the media and ultimately was partly responsible for clamping down in the capacity that he could at the time in the United States. So the media have and are naturally in many places adversarial by their nature. Now what happens is it's amplified, it's magnified, it's accelerated. Here's a couple good things. So what Google has found, for example, is every time there's been a presidential debate in the United States, and these presidential debates have not been especially enlightening so far, but Google finds a huge number, in the millions of people now, who are seeking information. They will actually search their own data as these politicians are speaking at them. Citizens have many more tools at their disposal now, and they will be their own investigators and their own journalists. I think we're fundamentally redefining how this information flow, how this proposition is going to exist in our societies, because traditional journalism as we know it is undergoing fundamental change, and citizens are being empowered to this extent, and public officials are being given these new tools as well. What I fear is that we're not as deeply informed. Well, I know we're not as deeply informed as we need to be. And so that's a profound challenge that we all confront.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've run out of time for our panel today, but these are clear issues for the future: social media, civic engagement, and how the public interacts with politicians around the world. Frank Sesno and Jie-ae Sohn, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank all of you for your attention, and now you are free for some coffee and a break. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.